This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 15th of December 2020 and I am 2J.
I am JM.
And I am GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, State House run too big a risk. In the Standard, kings and queens of political jabs. And in the Star, UHURU men prepare Mount Kenya ground for Raila. Let us begin. What is the risk at State House?
Yes, first of all, the headline is a bit confusing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I don't think they know what punctuation is. What they should have done is to say State House run, then full colon.
Yes.
Too big a
risk.
risk.
Okay, got
That's
it.
what they actually mean. And what they're saying here is, in light of the recommendations by the Constitutional Amendment Bill to have the position of Prime Minister, MP, and what have you, being selected as MPs, we're likely to have fewer candidates running for president. Because if you run for president, if you fail, fair enough, you get probably the second runner-up will get the leader of the opposition.
Yeah.
But if you come, let's say, third runner-up and so on,
That's it.
that's
get
it. You don't get anything. You might be appointed a cabinet minister and maybe made ex officio. But the point is that we're likely to have fewer and fewer candidates contesting for the big seat.
Oh, nice. So people will hedge their bets by running for MP because you have a better chance at
Of the PM position,
DPM and stuff like
Precisely,
that.
cabinet minister or deputy minister.
And I
even.
think I'm so excited by this, having Parliament become this new and center and theatre of war.
Yeah.
I think currently we don't really have that. When you look at like the British system, how parliamentary debates are so animated and so exciting, I think that it really shows off what politics can really be in this country.
So the MP becomes king again.
Exactly.
Interesting. So we have a 3-part criteria that we will use to break down the headlines. We ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy?
I think we toss it just based on JM's recommendation.
But I think it's such a good story, and I think it should have been given a better headline. Especially because imagine if you have the largest party in Parliament, like Raila did, but then having those dynamics play out, I think will be important. So in the Standard, we have the kings and queens of political jabs. And here the Standard is telling us how politicians have become vocal and ferociously loyal to their bosses. And they say the dandiest things at the slightest provocation. And we're told that, they've come together from, some brawled their way to Parliament, it is said, but together they have all mastered the art of, being quite abusive. And so it chronicles from as far back as 2016, 2017, when Ruto and UHURU were one side and Raila's on the other side, and the jibes that they gave each other. The most recent one, I think, is Aisha Jumwa and Sifuna. But basically, and then we have also, Sonko directing his attacks to General Badi, calling him Saddam Hussein. The most famous one was Duale telling Isaac Ruto, "Hi pasa siya mama yako, bwana," and all sorts of things. But I mean, I don't know if it was a very strong story, but I do like the headline itself.
Yes.
What is interesting, I think, is that it outlines how the jabs take a very sexist tone, which could be dangerous, because what are we teaching, younger generations? Yeah. I will say this: if you have to say or do something controversial, aim so that people will hate that they love it and not love that they hate it. Yeah. And that was said by Chris Jami.
Most definitely.
Yes, so I like it. I quite like the headline itself, though.
Yeah, I enjoy that headline.
So we can pack it.
Yes.
Let's move to the Star.
In the Star, UHURU men prepare Mount Kenya ground for Raila. Populous region wants key positions in ODM leader's future government. So the Star is telling us that a meeting last Friday in Nyandarua was attended by 5 governors who have all pledged to back the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. And of course, this is coming off the heels 5 months ago when the Kikuyu Council of Elders went to Bondo to kind of, have this historic visit saying that, yes, we will follow Raila. And they now Raila is supposed to then go back to the central Kenya to go and pledge his, allegiance to them as well.
They have a tough battle because the narrative has been so anti-Raila for so long in that area. And so now they have to do a real about turn and change the narrative.
So what the Star is kind of trying to frame this as is how we have Ruto on one side, Raila on the other, kind of fighting for this 8 million votes. And who's going to win? Will there be a split? Will it be a clear one side? So I think only time will tell what will happen. They say the visit is meant to happen next year, January. So a good start to the year.
Absolutely.
All right, so who do we give our winning headline? I propose it should go to the Standard.
I believe the Standard as well.
Yeah, there you have it. Standard gives us our winning headline. Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a 3-part criteria. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective or just plain lazy? Let us begin with the Daily Nation.
Yeah, so here we have a caricature of William Ruto versus Raila in a boxing match. And you've got some juniors over there, some lightweights, I suppose. Also boxing. And the caption says, MSAMBWENI curtain raising for the main fight. There's the by-election for the MSAMBWENI constituency happening today.
Yes,
I understand. And so there's an ODM candidate.
Yeah, Omar Boga.
Yes, and then there's also a candidate who's kind of being supported by the DP and
the
his allies.
independent.
And his name is Faisal Bader.
Absolutely.
Decent
so they'll fight it
cartoon.
out and we'll see who wins.
And I think we can look at that in conjunction with the Star, because I think it's quite a similar one. In the Star, you have a ballot box that looks kind of like a table. And on the ballot box, you have Aisha Jumwa and Hassan Joho, who seem to be, shouting expletives at each other. But then in the background, you have, based on the caption, shadow contest. You have...
And then he drew an actual shadow.
He actually drew a shadow. Oh my goodness. Ozone. But then, you have some of the shadow, people who are on either side of the camp. And then, of course, this is based on what Juma said to the residents of both Kilifi and Mombasa. The two governors, Amason Kingi of Kilifi and Hassan Joho of Mombasa, should not bother you, as they are failures who have not served you as you expected of them.
Wow. And it's interesting because historically Coast has always swung to Raila. So this will be actually a true referendum to see, whether he can still hold on to it.
But I think it also goes back to that headline of the Standard about how we have, these sexist remarks, jabs towards each other. I thought it was a funny cartoon, but funnier than the Daily Nation.
Yes, definitely. In the Standard, we have, so there's a dog called BBI. And there's a big is it a gramophone? I don't know.
Yes.
And it's called The Executive. And the caption there is his master's voice. So, it depicts the BBI task force as a dog that is listening to its master's voice, which is the executive.
Why? Okay,
I don't understand this.
I don't understand it, and also why is that a bad thing? It's the role of the executive to set the agenda for the country.
For what they want.
And so if their agenda is going to be BBI, so be it.
Can we cancel? Cancelling Gado. I propose we give Daily Nation and Star
winning cartoons.
A joint one.
I agree.
There you have it. We have a joint winning cartoon today. And now for our final thought. But before we get there, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now our final thought. Today is inspired by a book entitled How Democracies Die. So this week, as we round out 2020, we want to look at some books to understand some of the key things that happened this year. Politics, gender roles, plagues, and so on. So today we start with politics and looking at democracy. And so the authors of this book start by making note of an interesting phenomenon. Democracy no longer ends with a bang in a revolution or military coup, but in slow motion. A slow, steady weakening of critical institutions such as the judiciary, the press, and the gradual erosion of long-standing political norms. So since the end of the Cold War, most democracies have not been overthrown externally by violent military coups, but internally through the ballot box, surprisingly, and the subsequent capture of political institutions by autocrats. So for them, the great indication of this disaster happened during the final year of the Obama presidency in the context of the United States. So following the sudden death of the conservative Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia in early 2016, Obama nominated Merrick Garland, a centrist liberal, to replace him. And so it was up to the Senate to decide whether to confirm the president's choice. But the Senate did something that had never been done in more than 150 years. It refused to even give him a hearing. They refused to see him.
Wow.
So this was not about Trump, who was then candidate at the time, because most Republican senators were deeply alarmed, if not hostile, to the prospect of Trump even being in the White House. But instead, it was about their shared view that any Republican Supreme Court nominee would be better than any Democratic nominee. And it was a price worth paying to achieve that. And so this was a preeminent example of what the authors Levitsky and Ziblatt called the erosion of norms, which they consider the greatest threat to contemporary democracy. So norms are the unspoken rules and conventions that hold a democracy together. And many of them are based on the idea that what's good for your side in the short term may not do you any good in the long run because you won't be in power forever. So when the other side get their turn, your impatience to take advantage will become their license to exact revenge. It's like that old saying, you should be nice to people on your way up so that they'll be nice to you on your way down. And clearly in politics at the moment, almost nobody seems to live by that rule. And so in refusing to do what all their predecessors had done before, even if reluctantly, the Senate class of 2016 did not break the law. It wasn't a coup, but it was a refusal to play by the rules of the game. So they said to hell with the consequences. And so the authors point out that US history is littered with examples of political behavior that stayed within the letter of the law, but still did catastrophic damage to democracy. And so they give the example of the racist regime that prevailed in the American South during the first half of the 20th century, that was underpinned by a set of norms that made it very hard for African Americans to have meaningful votes. And so the two norms that the authors think that underpin democracy are called mutual toleration and institutional forbearance. And very simply what that means is that you allow the opposition to exist, but you have the tolerance to follow the law even though it may not suit you. And so I think at the end of the day, one of the conclusions that they came to is that it's so important to learn to work with your opposition, learn to work together. And I think in Kenya, the handshake has become the prime example of what working together can do for democracy and the benefit of a country.
Fantastic. That was very interesting.
So these guys talk about the gradual collapse of democracy, and they say that dictators don't appear overnight. So they cook over a long period of time. They capture democratic institutions and bend them to their will. And there as a result of the gradual erosion of these democratic norms that you've talked about, Tujay, people like Donald Trump are also known to have polarized society quite deeply, fundamentally, in order to ascend to power. And they give an example of the Trump presidency and how Trump attempted from day one to cultivate that image of a dictator, breaking the norms. For example, he followed the authoritarian playbook in very many actions during his first 100 days. So early on in his administration, he tried to capture some of the referees in the institutions. In his first week as president, he reportedly sat down to a dinner with former FBI Director James Comey and asked him to pledge his loyalty to him. And when it became clear that Comey had no such intentions, Comey was fired. And there's a brilliant two-part series, or two-episode series on the Comey rule, I think.
It was very good.
From Showtime or something like that. Trump also tried to sideline opposition players, particularly journalists, media outlets. We know on numerous occasions he repeatedly called them, people like New York Times and CNN, fake news, and so on. So really bastardizing them in the court of public opinion. Then we are told he also attempted to change the rules of the game, apparently following his continued accusations of voter fraud during the 2016 election. He created the Presidential Advisory Commission on election integrity,
Oh, yes.
which aimed to create stricter voting ID laws. A tactic, we're told, that aimed to lock out minority voters who were on the side of the Democratic Party. It looks like, the American electorate, American citizens were not too impressed by all these actions. And this is perhaps partly why they decided to, not vote him in.
For a second term,
for a second time round, absolutely.
Oh, interesting. I really like this book. I picked out a couple of things. One was how over time, the gatekeepers, the referees, have lost power to the electorate. So they argue, the authors argue, that the evolution of the primary process, so the process in which the candidates for the presidential election are picked, is one way in which the political system has indeed lost this power. So before 1972, and through the 20th century, a lot of the way the presidential candidates were picked was through, smoke-filled room with, party leaders sort of agreeing who will be the best bet and best representative for the party. And then in 1972, we have the beginning of these primaries, where the candidates are essentially selected by voters. And they ask whether this change over time, whether we've given sort of too much democracy to the people and whether they are the best bet in choosing who the best candidate should be. And I think they even allude to the fact that that's how a Trump presidency sort of was even possible, because maybe the Republican elite were not all for it, but the people were. And the other thing I picked up, which I thought was interesting, was something that he calls the Faustian bargain. And it's in a chapter called Fateful Alliances. And it's about circumstances or cases where the populist demagogue turns out to be an authoritarian. And how he got there was actually from help from mainstream political figures or parties. And they give a few examples. One of them is Hugo Chavez. So with the aid of President Caldera, who freed him from jail, Caldera was a long-standing politician, an establishment in sort of the politics of Venezuela. And so he frees Chavez, who then gains legitimacy through this process and then eventually comes to power, and then you saw how that happened, what happened there. They give an example of Mussolini. Mussolini was able to increase his profile by being put on a party list, by being friends and cozying up with a leading liberal statesman called Giovanni Giolotti. And so he included him on his party's list, and he gained legitimacy in that way. And we saw what happened with Mussolini. And then there's Hitler, who came to power in a similar alliance with mainstream conservative politicians at the end of the 1920s and into the 1930s. And eventually became Chancellor of Germany. And in each instance, they have what they call the Faustian bargain. Now, the Faustian bargain can be described as an agreement in which a person abandons his or her spiritual values or moral principles in order to obtain knowledge, wealth, or other benefits. In other words, you make a deal with the devil. Now, the idea, I think, usually is that when you make friends with the demagogues or you sort of prop them up, that you think that you would control them. And the mistake that those established politicians make is to underestimate thinking that they can control them. And there's a huge miscalculation in that sense. So those are some of the things I picked up. I think everyone should read it. On a day where we had a winning headline from The Standard, winning cartoon from both The Star and The Daily Nation, I want to leave you with this. This book got me thinking, more questions actually than answers. Do citizens in a democracy overestimate their influence? Question mark. How, outside of elections, can the average citizen aid the gatekeeping process? Because we are very aware that they're gatekeepers, they are owners of things, right? Anyway, in the end, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Do have a lovely evening. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, but find us on TV on GoTV, Prime Free to Air, and Star Times.